And welcome to this webinar. We're checking in with you, accredited businesses live, and it is good to have you with us. We're talking today, leading in a time of crisis, with New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author Jason Jennings. Quick update on the webinar as we have more folks joining us right now. We're going to make this as interactive as possible. There is a Q&A session that's coming up later on in this webinar, and if you've got questions, be sure and write those into the Q&A session. And we're going to take about 10 minutes at the end of the webinar for Jason to answer your questions live during these webinars. Better Business Bureau has a host of resources available for you, and these webinars are one of those where we're bringing experts to you directly live twice a week to help you as a business navigate these trying times and do it with trust. We have a specific web page that is posted with the latest information regarding COVID and how businesses are going through that process. And we have a web page, Facebook group, a private Facebook group just for accredited businesses that you can interact with other like-minded businesses, learn best practices, share ideas, and it's all there online. Our guest today, I'll tell you, Jason Jennings is a New York Times, Wall Street Journal, and USA Today bestselling author of 8 books on leadership, growth, innovation, speed, and reinvention. Jason is the author who USA Today calls one of the 3 most in-demand business speakers in the world. His books are consistently described by critics as extraordinarily well-researched, insightful, crisply written, accessible, intriguing, and a vital resource for everyone in business. He's delivered more than 1,200 motivating and inspirational keynote speeches and seminars in more than 100 countries. We are incredibly fortunate to have you with us today, Jason Jennings. Thank you.
Dale, it is great to be with you. What viewers probably don't know is that Dale and I regularly share duties and responsibilities at a podcast where we've done 230 episodes over the past several years. So this is like old times, Dale.
Jason, I will call you a good friend, and a huge thank you. When I asked Jason, would you be willing to come and share what you know with these businesses that are dealing with very difficult times, you didn't hesitate. You were like, let's do it as soon as possible. So thank you for jumping in like that. And when we had this conversation about helping small business through this time, and we talked through this leading in a time of crisis, it is so appropriate. So with that, I will say the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. I'm honored to be with you. I must tell you that my job is to help take people and their businesses to their full economic potential, to make people think about what is possible, to help people in any way that I can. A couple of days ago, I had one of my bad days. I've been self-quarantined for a couple of weeks in my little village in Northern California in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I was just a little down, a little worried like everybody else is. And I finally decided you've got to shake it off. And so I got my gear on and I went out to the treadmill and I did 45 minutes of intervals. And that made me feel pretty good. And afterwards, my treadmill room is built off my garage. So I wiped down the machine, got off the treadmill, walked through the garage, and then walked through a greenhouse to go into the family room. And as I looked out the window, I went, oh my God, look at this. And there was the most gorgeous rainbow I have ever seen in my life. And I thought, well, get a picture. I thought, no, rainbows don't photograph well. But I went and grabbed my iPhone 11 and went out. And this is actually taken through a window of the greenhouse. And I snapped the picture. And I can't begin to tell you how much joy this picture has given me over the past couple of days. If you can take a look at the picture and follow the rainbow all over to the right-hand end, you know where it ends up? In St. Hilary's Church, which has stood guard over the community of Tiburon, California since its founding a long time ago. It's a good reminder that whatever we're facing, there is always hope, and we have to look and try to find it. So this is called Leading in a Time of Crisis. Do we have a crisis on our hands? I picked up the Wall Street Journal this morning, and right there on the front page, as virus strains economy, companies bank on cash. And so I started reading the article. Do you know the Gap has 40 days of cash? TJ Maxx has got 32 days of cash. Best Buy's got 30 days of cash. Nordstrom has got 27 days of cash. Macy's has got 18 days of cash. Kohl's is operating with 14 days of cash. And get this, Dollar General stores are operating with only 4 days of cash. Yeah, I'd say that we have a crisis on our hands. Let me tell you where the information I'm going to share with you today comes from. My researchers and I have studied more than 220,000 companies for my books. I've spent more than 30 years teaching, consulting, and observing great companies around the world. My own experiences as a business owner and entrepreneur, because over the years, I've been tested just like everyone is being tested today. More than 20,000 interviews for every speech or workshop or seminar I do. I interview about a dozen people, and that includes the CEO and the business owners and the leading entrepreneurs. There's been more than 20,000 interviews with the best around the world. And I'm also going to share some of the best and worst advice I've ever received or observed. And let me begin by telling you the story of how one day I got the worst advice I've ever received and the best advice I've ever received from the same man in one short sentence. I was in my early 20s and had already owned a couple of radio stations. And we decided that what we were doing was going to change the world. And so we started a consulting company. And the consulting company was growing very, very rapidly. It was called Jennings, McLaughlin and Company. And when you're growing a company fast, you need to bring in some outside capital, either borrow it or put it in if you had it. We were all in 22, 23, 24. We didn't have it. But finally, a group of outside investors put together a couple of $100,000. And all they wanted in return, they didn't want a seat on the board. They didn't want a change in ownership, or a change in leadership, but they wanted to put their man in to just be the adult in the room, if you will. You hear a lot of that with high-tech companies. And so his name was Bill. He was the retired CEO of a big bank in California. And so we gave him an office, and he would come in about 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning and just talk to people and amble around. And then about noon, he'd leave for the day. And it became a joke because we knew where he went. He went across the street to a restaurant, and we knew that he had 2 or 3 hard drinks. He was kind of a little bit into the schlook. And so finally one day, he said, let me take you, Jason, and Michael, and Lawrence, and let me take you all out for lunch across the street. And so we go to lunch, and he orders his martini. I can't even imagine having a martini at lunch. That's as good as your day is going to get. But that many years ago, I guess there was a lot of drinking going on at lunch. And then he had a second one, and then he had a third one. And he's sharing his thoughts and observations, and most of them are very astute and right on. Well, by now, he's in his cups. I mean, the guy's fairly tooted. And he was loosening up, but he was red in the face. And he finally said, before we end up, he said, let me share the most important thing I've ever learned in business. And there's a point for my telling you this story that'll come home in a moment. He said, sometimes, he said, it's not right, but sometimes you got to BS your employees. He said, sometimes it's not right, but you got to BS your customers. He said, but you can never BS yourself. Well, I thought those first two things, we thought they were stupid. Why would you ever want to BS your employees? Why would you ever want to BS your customers? But I've never forgotten what he said. So I discounted that bit of advice to a drunken guy. But I can't begin to tell you, I probably invoke this thought on a daily basis and have throughout my entire career. Don't ever BS yourself. And so what I'm going to ask you to do during our time together is be brutally honest with yourself, because I'm going to be asking you some very, very tough questions. You have to supply the answers, but don't BS yourself. Don't be delusional. Here are my 8 steps for leading in a time of crisis. Number 1, it all starts with this. You have to do a hard examination of all of your available resources. What does that include? That includes how much cash you have on hand. Imagine, how would you like to be Dollar General stores today with 4 days of cash on hand? I can't even imagine. Your receivables, and we'll have a short little note about that a little later on. What's available from borrowing, and additional capital you or others are willing to invest. Now, this is a number that everybody in business should know all the time. And unfortunately, I'm amazed. Most people can tell you roughly how much cash they have on hand, but they don't know about the receivables. They don't know what's available now from borrowing, and they don't know about additional capital that they or others are willing to put in. Well, this is the time now more than ever before that you need to know this number. How much cash do you have on hand? What are your receivables? Because there's ways to turn your receivables into cash. You can sell them, you can borrow money against them, and you can do that fairly easily. The practice is called factoring. It's very commonly done. What's available from borrowing? You just can't say, well, if I really needed to, I could go out and get a $50,000 line of equity in my house. Well, I'd say get the $50,000 line of equity now, because there's so many people trying to do it right now that they might not get to you. I saw an interview the other day with the CEO of AMC Theaters, the biggest theater chain in the world with several thousand screens. Last year, they did $600 million in revenue, $6 billion in revenue, and made $700 million in profit. They have no cash. They've been shuttered. They have no cash. And he says, I don't know where we're going to find cash, because when you try to talk to the bankers, there's 10 guys bigger than you standing in line in front of you who want to talk to them first. And then, of course, you have to ask the question, what is the additional capital you or others are willing to invest to save your business and to help your business prosper in the long run? Everybody needs to come up with that number, and you need to make that number, you need to have it on a dashboard so you can confront that number and see that number every day. Step number 2, we're going into some uncharted territory here. But what I ask people to do is do a real hard examination of your projected revenue for the next 3 months, 6 months, and 12 months. I don't know right now. We don't know what's going to happen. We've got some people saying that churches will be full by Easter and will be beyond this. On the other hand, if you watch the mainstream media, they say we might not even reach the crescent of this for weeks or months. So I don't know how you're going to be able to do a 6 or 12-month projected revenue estimate, but I do know you better be thinking long and hard about the next 3 to 6 months. And let me just share with you an example. I want you to pretend you're in the restaurant business. And these figures are fairly accurate. Spent some time with some restaurateurs on the phone in the last couple of days. So one of the restaurants I talked to did an average annualized week of about $20,000. Well, they're now closed, like many restaurants in America. And they're only doing takeaway and takeout and delivery. And now they're doing about $7,000 in takeaway orders and delivery orders. So they're doing about a third. Well, if you play that out, that means you're going to have a loss of about $13,000 a week over the next several months. And that totals $162,000 over the first 3 months. Now, obviously, if you're selling a lot less food, and if food costs are running 30 to 35%, you can reduce that $162,000 by about $35,000 to $40,000, but you're still going to be out of rounds $120,000. So what you have to do, so for example, I learned that Idaho went on lockdown yesterday. So their restaurants are presumably closed and only open for takeaway. Well, you better be getting on the phone with some friends or counterparts, or just calling blind and talking to restaurants in California where it's been in effect for a couple of weeks and saying, what are you doing? You're going to have to get creative. You're going to have to talk to lots of people about what you could expect to happen in terms of revenues. Step number 3, you have to do this. You have to conduct weekly town halls with your people, either in person or virtually, like this Zoom meeting. And you have to ask them several things. You have to begin by doing a check-in with everyone and see how they're doing. Barney, how are you doing? Maria, how are you doing? How are you dealing with this, Michael? People really, more than ever, people have a need to tell their story, to talk. There's a lot of fear because there's a lot of unknown. People are looking for certainty. There isn't a whole lot of certainty to be had. That's why I did a podcast last week on how to create certainty in your life. But you have to be seen as being compassionate and truly interested in your people. Next, you have to ask this team on how you can immediately raise revenues. And you have to ask this team, how can we reduce expenses? Let me take you back to the very, very first business I ever owned. I started doing a radio show when I was 13. And by the time I finished high school and got into college, I knew one thing, that as soon as I got out of school, I was going to become the youngest owner of a radio station in America. I didn't have any money. I'm from very modest means. But I found a radio station in Flagstaff, Arizona. It was $500,000. That'd be $3 or $4 million today. And the owner was willing to sell for a $50,000 down payment. I honestly don't remember. I had about 20 or 25,000. I cashed in life insurance. I sold my car, somehow came up with almost all the $50,000, and we closed the sale. And then let me tell you what happened within the first several months. Number one, you're not old enough to remember this. and I'm not that old, but I bet you're not old enough to remember this. We had gas rationing. We had a gas crisis. You could only get gas every second day. Flagstaff's economy, tourist economy, based on the Grand Canyon. What do you think happened to visits to the Grand Canyon? They disappeared. At the same time, the professors at Northern Arizona University went on strike over issues of pay and academic tenure, and tens of thousands of students didn't come back. They shuttered the university. And to top it off, there were tens of thousands of Native Americans living in tribal lands dependent on beneficiary payments, and the government cut them. If I tell you it was a ghost town, it was a ghost town. I had no idea what we were going to do. And so I went to my people and I said, what are some of your ideas? And their ideas were splendid. And the one I'll never forget is we were halfway through our first meeting, and our morning man, his name was Bob, did the morning show, said, well, you know, my wife works and she's got a good income. He said, you know, I could really go without a paycheck for several months. That wouldn't affect us. I said, are you serious, Bob? He said, yes. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, you'll get a paycheck every week. It'll just be a promissory note. I mean, at the, 4 or 5 or 6% interest, whatever it was. And then Suda, who was the news director, said, you know what, I've always been a saver. I really don't need money. I can do the same thing. Out of a staff of like 25 people, 6 or 7 people said, we can go for 2 or 3 months without. Somebody else said, you know what, the big thing is we all need groceries. And so somebody said, well, look, the grocery stores need to advertise more than ever, but they don't have money to advertise. They're hit with the same thing we are. And we don't have money for food. So we did trade arrangements with a number of grocery stores where they'd get a couple $1,000s in advertising a month, and we would get certificates for our people for food. And I offer that not as a perfect answer in trying times, but some of the things that you will hear from your people. Your people are truly your best asset. Your people truly want you to make it, and they will come up with absolutely brilliant ideas. So conduct weekly or twice weekly town hall meetings. People want to be comforted. People want to know they're contributing, and people want to know that they're part of something bigger than themselves. Step number 4, you're going to have to consider the importance of and your commitment to your people when developing the plan forward. So let me explain this with an example. Arrow Electronics, based in Denver, Colorado, is about a $32 billion a year company. And during the 2008, 2009 Great Recession, where everything fell apart, Mike Long did not want to lay off people. He had about 17 or 18,000 workers. And so he got together his global leadership team of about 250 people. And he said, you know what? If we would reduce our compensation by 30 to 35% until this is over, we wouldn't have to lay one person off. And the leadership team agreed, and that's what they did. And imagine what happened. When the economy came roaring back, and it did, their big competitor had laid off thousands of people. Think of all of the intellectual property that was gone, all the knowledge that was gone, and their biggest competitor never came back. It didn't happen. And so you're going to have to ask yourself the question, how important are your people? And I came up with a couple of numbers today, and I didn't even have time to put them on a slide for you. But according to the Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, to replace a person costs $4,129 and takes 42 days. Glassdoor says it costs $4,000 and 52 days to replace a person. But SHRM also says something else interesting. Once you've hired somebody, it takes 38% of their annual salary on training before they become fully productive. I mean, the last thing that any business would want to do, is start willy-nilly laying off people. I understand when push comes to shove at the end of the day, you may have to make that decision, but don't make that decision until you've asked, what is the worth and what is the benefit of your people, and what's the guarantee that you're gonna get them when they come back. Let me speak from the heart for a moment. Speaking all over the world, I can't begin to tell you how many times I've heard the story of somebody will come up to me after a speech. I'll just, one specific example I remember. And this man introduced himself to me, and he was the CEO of a huge lumber yard with a number of locations, big business. And he had somebody else with him, one of his workers. And this worker said, He said, well, that's what he is, the CEO. He said, let me tell you who he is, what he's really all about. He said, during the last downturn, he got everybody together and said, you know what? If everybody will take a 20% cut, he said, I'll make it up to you afterwards. And what I'm doing is I'm not taking a penny out. I'm not going to take a penny out. And he said, that's the type of man that says, I have heard that story played back so many hundreds of times. So you really have to ask yourself, what is the worth of your people? There is no one size fits all. It's going to be different for other people. Step number 5, then based on what you've learned from the analysis of your available cash, your likely revenues, the input of your people, the value you've placed on retaining people, then you have to develop 3 things. You've got to develop a likely case, a best case, and a worst case scenario. You've got to develop a specific plan, and you've got to have dates for when you're going to push the button and when it's going to take place. Nobody can build that plan for you because nobody has the knowledge that you have. I wish I could reach upward and grab some magic answers, but these are the hard questions that you're going to have to come up with the answers yourself. Step 6 is this, and this is of vital importance. You have to promise everyone who works for you to be completely transparent about your process, keep them appraised of your process, and then you have to keep that promise. I was very inspired by the words of the Dalai Lama, who says, a lack of transparency results in distrust and a deep sense of insecurity. You don't need people who don't trust you or who actively distrust you, and you don't need a group of people who are acting with a deep sense of insecurity. This is a call, and this is a time to act with transparency. Step number 7. This is going to be a hard one. Dale and I had a big discussion about this about a week ago, and he kind of pressed me hard on this one. He said, aren't you contradicting yourself? The advice is this: stay firm, positive, open, honest, and compassionate. Look at pictures of rainbows. But you got to do your worrying and wringing of hands with your husband, wife, or your partner. Nobody wants to see their leader come unhinged. You're allowed to say, I'm scared. I'm as scared as you are. You're allowed to say, I'm nervous. But you also have to be able to put the hand on the shoulder and say, but somehow we're all going to get through this together. So positive, firm, open, honest, compassionate. But you don't want to ever be seen as coming unhinged. Step number 8. Well, I guess this is what you'd expect from somebody who likes to help other people feel good. Watch out for and be nice to others and help where you're able. Here's what I'm doing. Everybody will have to pick their own things. First of all, do not give up on your purpose. One day, I hope we'll have a chance to talk about the difference between purpose-led businesses, purpose-led companies, purpose-led enterprises, because I've spent my life studying and speaking about purpose. But if you've got a purpose, you know what I'm talking about. It's not a mission statement. It's not a vision statement. It's what you're really trying to do, how you're trying to change the world, how you're trying to make it a better place. Do not give up your purpose. In my case, as someone who's traveled 10 million miles on airplanes, and I'm generally on an airplane someplace to speak about 60 to 80 times a year, I have no speeches coming up over the next several months. They haven't been canceled, but they've all been postponed. So what am I doing? Well, we're arranging food and med runs for some elderly neighbors up and down the street. I'm working on my next book, and some days that's hard. Some days it's hard to concentrate, and I will admit that. And then I just go and do intervals on the treadmill and do my push-ups and just go right back at it. We're donating to groups who are helping the most vulnerable among us. For us, those are people who are homeless. But here's the fun one, and I would urge you to do this. Dale and I talked about this. I'm calling 5 people a day. Some people I haven't talked to for 6 months, a year, but they're in my address book. I've got fond memories of these people. I'm calling 5 people a day and just saying, hi, it's Jason. I'm just checking in. How are you doing? Are you nervous? Are you self-quarantining? What's keeping you going? What's keeping you strong? And then, I know for a lot of guys, this one is hard, but I've now come to a different place in my life. I just want you to know that you're loved and that I love you. So Dale, as we generally do in the podcast, why don't you do a review?
So just in case you're wondering, the podcast is The Game Changers with Jason Jennings. If you want to go and find your favorite podcast player, that's where you're going to find Jason delivering this kind of information often. And Jason, thank you so much for your time. So in review, the first step that Jason shared with us is, number one, know where your available financial resources are and what they are. So important. At number two, do complete revenue scenarios for your business. At number three, it's a weekly all hands on deck meeting with your people. I can tell you that we are doing this in every department and within the organization. Every department is holding every day meetings, each daily meetings, and we're holding weekly all staff meetings. And we have 140 employees, and we're able to do it with the technology. And Zoom is super easy to do that with, just what we're using this webinar for. So the technology's there. No matter where your people are at, you can do it. Determine the value and worth of your people. I can't tell you enough. This is so important. And to communicate that to your folks on a daily basis, it will help relieve the stress like nothing else. Coming in at number 5 on that list, build your plan with trigger dates. So you use all of the information that Jason talked about and assembling, and then you build out a plan. And as Jason said, only you know that. You're the only one that has access to that information, and put those trigger dates and then work the plan. And remember that your plan, you're going to need to be flexible as you work that plan, right, Jason? Because
yes,
we haven't seen times like this change hour to hour, day to day, like we have with this crisis.
Right.
Stay transparent. So important. That's a BBB standard for trust, and so important to your surviving and ultimately thriving through this crisis. Then remain firm, positive, open, and compassionate. And, Jason alluded to, we talked through this. Transparency and a positive attitude work really well hand in hand. Yes, we're worried, but talk through those things with someone really close to you. Don't let it add to the stress level of your people. And at number 8, be nice. It's amazing. Call people that you haven't talked to in a while. Look for opportunities to, when you're in the grocery store line, hey, thank you for doing what you're doing, because those folks who are running the cash register, stocking shelves in the grocery store, are working incredibly hard.
Dale, I have to interrupt and tell you something that happened the other day. I'm sorry. I was in a grocery store, our once a week grocery run, and I was in line. Everybody was keeping their distance. Everybody was pretty good. And I got up to the cashier, and it was a large order, and the cashier had a really good attitude. And we were chit-chatting as he was scanning everything. And we got to the end, and I said, I want to thank you for being here. You are truly on the front lines. Thank you for your service. And this big, brawny, tough guy started to cry. And he said, you're the first person who's told me that.
They need to be hearing it a lot more often. We all have an opportunity to do that with hundreds of people who are watching this live right now, and the hundreds and thousands more who will be watching it and the recorded version. So we had one comment, and I don't know when the comment came up in the Q&A during the 8 points that you gave out from Danielle Tomlinson. The Marriott CEO is doing that as we webinar. So that was in response to one of the points that you made. But definitely the Q&A section is up and live. If anybody has a quick question, not taking a penny in. Thank you, Danielle. You're right on top of it. So she wrote that the Marriott CEO is not taking a penny in compensation right now through this crisis.
He's a good man. I've done a couple of events for Marriott. His name escapes me right now, but he's a very good man.
And Daniel, I am reading off the small screen. So thank you very much, Daniel. I appreciate it. And any other questions that come up, it's great to interact with our audience like this. And Jason, I will ask you as we wait for more Q&A to come in, because we've gone a little long on this, but the information was so rich and so valuable. Any final words for us?
Well, I guess you always ask me if I have a final thought. And, my final thought is this. And everybody's probably heard this before. So I want to find out to who I could attribute it to. It seems like everybody's claimed that these are their words. I mean, everybody. There's hundreds of people who've claimed that these. So I'm going to do the same. They're not my words, but so many people have claimed them. But it's worth remembering. Yesterday is history. Today is a mystery. Today is a gift from God, which is why we call it the present.
There you go. It is a gift. And thank you for sharing that amazing picture of your rainbow out the back porch of your house. So information. Let's see. We do have a few questions coming in. Let me pull that up on the screen. So we can share a link to Jason's podcast. I can tell you where you can find Jason's podcast. The easiest way to do it, jason-jennings.com. jason-jennings.com is the website. And once you get there, across the top, you'll see a podcast link. Also, we're going to make this available as a recording. So be watching our private Facebook group. Also be watching the YouTube channel for bbb.org. And we've got that one website that's dedicated to all of the most recent information that we have on COVID and how businesses can respond. We will make that available, all of it, on those web pages in the coming hours and within the next 24 hours. I'm looking to Jamie Dillon, who's on this podcast, just for a nod of the head. Thank you so much, Jamie, and a big thank you to Jason Kama, who has helped as well through this process. Jason, I will tell you that in the comments section, we have a lot of folks who are saying thank you for this information. So a lot of gratitude coming from this group of business owners that you have just been a big help to. We appreciate that. And we'll have more webinars coming your way every Tuesday and Thursday, 2 o'clock Mountain, 1 o'clock Pacific, and be watching for information on those in your email. Jason Jennings, we cannot thank you enough. Folks want to learn more about you and what you can bring to business. It's jason-jennings.com, the website. We really appreciate your time today.
It was wonderful being with you. You can call on me anytime.
All right. Thank you so much. And with that, we're going to sign off. Have a great afternoon. Do something good for somebody today.